Look at that. How wonderful. I love it when things work.
Awesome.
Uh, Hi, everybody. Want to welcome you. Uh, this is Vinny, Director of Fortify Groups, doing the webinar today with our guest, Josh Hanson. Josh, he is a man who has risen from what we call the trenches. That's a common recovery expression. You've been in the trenches for decades. You don't look old enough, Josh, to have been anywhere for decades, but
Well,
you have.
thank you.
You found that this addiction almost destroyed you, and you now enjoy a level of freedom that is, well, you never thought it was possible. Let's put it that way. In that process, you have developed and mastered some unique tools and techniques that have enabled you to engage your own brain to rewire itself. And we're all working on that. You now describe the level of freedom that you have as being the man that you would have been had you not chosen to look at pornography. But you also add that you're better than that now because you are also able to help others. When we talk about what has changed my life, we have lots of tools, but I will tell you, we so appreciate you being here. I've learned personally that giving back, helping others, sharing, as the 12 steps call it, sharing our experience, strength, and hope is a big deal. It contributes to our recovery in huge ways. You like to say about yourself that you're not somebody with a lot of credentials, just a guy who's figured out some cool things that helped you unlock real and lasting freedom. I'm here to tell you that when we talk about credentials, I can't think of a more important one when it comes to speaking on this topic than the amazing experience that you've had. And it's such a wonderful story that we've included it in the Fortify platform. If those of you that are interested in seeing this or see this on the replay, go to week 5 if you haven't been there. Go to week 5 if you have been there. Lesson 1, seeing your freedom, and you'll hear more of Josh's story. You also enjoy spending time with your wife. You like riding motorcycles, and I love of your bio. You spend time entertaining your special needs twin sisters with corny jokes. Share a corny joke with us, Josh.
You know, my corny jokes, the reason that they laugh is because they're on their level. So we'll leave them with them.
Very good.
Let,
We're fortunate to have you, Josh. I've had the privilege of working with Josh. He is a group leader extraordinaire. I've had nothing but positive feedback from his group members. And maybe some of you, after hearing today's webinar, are going to feel like, hey, I want to sign up for that guy's group. He's got some great things to share, and he does. Welcome, Josh, to the Fortify webinar.
yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for setting this up. You know, the tools and techniques that I'm going to be discussing today, or that we're discussing today, are really important to me, and because they've had such a huge impact on my life. They've drastically changed the way that I am able to interact and perceive the world around me. So I feel passionate about sharing them, and I feel honored to be part of the Fortify group, and feel very lucky to be able to share what I've learned with such an awesome platform and have the means to do that.
And it is our honor and privilege to hear of your experience. That's why you're here. You've got a level of freedom that you've achieved that I like to call fascinating. I like to think I've read about every book there is to read on recovery. I certainly don't know everything there is to know, but I have considered myself a student of recovery for a long time, and hearing new ideas, even new takes of old ideas, isn't a common experience for me after 25 years in this arena. And this is a beautiful, what I would call sort of a new tool that I really haven't ever heard described in quite this way. Uh, and it's one of the primary reasons we've asked you to speak today, flipping the freedom switch. But freedom can sometimes have different meaning to different people. For some, freedom in this arena means, I'm a week free. I've been a week clean. And that means sobriety to them, staying away, avoiding the using, and really not much more. But to you, freedom has a little deeper meaning than that. Can you say more about that, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that even just not just between people, but even within the same person, depending on where you're at in your journey, that can look completely
Yeah.
different. When I first started into recovery, first of all, I didn't think about things in terms of freedom. It was just how long can I go without viewing pornography? It was more time frames than anything.
Yeah.
Um, and then eventually it was like, oh, maybe a goal of, and just I don't know if you can call it a goal, but just super loose, that I never want to look at pornography again. But I've been able to transition into a very different place now. From now no longer I now no longer use time frames to judge how long, or my level of freedom. It's been 4 or 5 years. I don't even know exactly how long it's been, but freedom feels different to me. It's very much a state of mind and a state of being. Um, and up until up until this one particular point, I had always accepted that it was just going to be that freedom. I didn't really have this concept of freedom. Um, and I had, I'm a religious person, and there's a scripture that I really love, and the summary of it is that our weaknesses can be made our strengths. Now, initially, earlier on in recovery, I thought about that and thought, okay, well, I can be really good. My strength can be really good at fighting the temptation. But especially after I have made these changes and implemented some of the tools that we're going to talk about, it changed for me to really believing that I could be the man that I would have been had I actively chosen never to view pornography. Now, sometimes it's hard for people to understand and grasp. So I've found in the presentations that I've done that people have an easier time relating to what freedom looks like when it's an addiction that they don't currently struggle with.
Huh.
So I'm going to relate it to cocaine.
Okay.
And for those of you watching, if you've had issues with cocaine, then replace cocaine with some other harmful substance or addictive experiences or whatever it is. Replace it with something that you haven't struggled with. Now, if somebody was to put some cocaine in front of me, there would be no temptation for me. They couldn't pay me to take it. I would not do it because I know the impact that it could have on me, and it could destroy myself and my family. So there's no way that I would do that. And it wouldn't even be a temptation. So to me, that's the level of freedom that I
Wow.
wanted to achieve, and that's where I'm at now. So it's a completely different feeling. It just feels different. It's living different.
I love this, Josh. You just triggered something in me. I will sometimes apologize to my own group members and those I work with, and they'll say, what's your sobriety date? And I got my start in AA. A lot of people know that. And, everybody's got coins and sobriety dates. And, January 3rd, 2001 at 8:43 in the morning or the evening. And they remember that date. And I've always felt a little guilty that I really can't remember the day. I sort of remember the month, and I pretty much remember the year. But I was not, although I started that way, I wasn't a day counter. And you're sort of alluding to that, I think, this state of being. It's almost like there was this transformation from the old day counter to my life didn't just change, it was transformed. And it was more like this new state of being that I was no longer thinking about when was the last time I saw porn. I was now thinking about all the beautiful things in my life that I was participating in. And it's like the sobriety date lost its importance because it wasn't a date. It wasn't a thought about time. It was a thought about the state of being. Is that kind of where you're headed with that? I love
Yeah,
that. So
yeah,
now
yeah,
I'm not the
absolutely.
only one that's in recovery that didn't remember their recovery date, Josh. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
People that are watching right now and will be watching on the replay, they want to know, okay, how'd you get to that level of freedom? How'd you do it?
And it's a great question. Um, so before I give you that information, I think it's important to preface that um, that the tools and techniques that I'm going to share are not a cure-all. They had drastic impacts on the rate of acceleration that I had towards freedom, but I did a lot of recovery work prior to this. I met with several counselors focused specifically on addiction to pornography. I met with several groups, 12-step groups, faith-based groups, science-based groups, and groups for husbands and wives. So I put a lot of time and energy and kind of did a lot of the groundwork that I think recovery from any addiction demands that we change, that there is progress on our part. Otherwise, we would just be, if we still had the same issues and we didn't know how to handle the challenges of life, we would just replace it with something else. It would just naturally happen. So it demands that change.
I hear you say two things. The recovery is not one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
What you're sharing today is not um, isn't a cure all. I appreciate you saying that. You're sharing what has worked for you. I also hear you saying you've done a lot of work. We always talk about recovery is work. And at the end of meetings, we often hear, keep on working. It works if you work it. You did a lot of work. Do you feel that was wasted time? Because there was a change when you discovered this idea. For you, this was a gigantic turning point and transition point, and yet you had all these years of, between therapist groups, et cetera, et cetera. Was that wasted time for you?
No, absolutely not. Because it taught me the groups and the things that I was learning. It taught me some really, really powerful things. It taught me that I needed to be accountable, and it provided a means for me to be accountable. It also helped me to recognize triggers, recognize when I'm experiencing them. I got really good at that, which really enabled some of the tools that we're going to talk about a little bit later. I also got really good at anticipating triggers, um, which really comes into play as well as we move on. But I was introduced to pornography at age 7, struggled with it for 15 years, and kind of off and on, and then really started struggling with it. And I spent the next 7 years really doing a lot of that groundwork, so that if I look back on the whole progress of my life in relation to finding freedom from addiction, it's a really beautiful experience because it really set me up to be able to learn these tools, and now I'm able to share them with others. And ultimately, what this set me up for was, it took me to a level of white knuckle sobriety where I was able to, and that's what it felt like. Every day felt like just white knuckle sobriety, right? It was just
Look at your body language, Josh.
scrapping the wheel.
That is not freedom. It's white.
Mm-hmm.
It's
And
almost
trying to avoid triggers.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Oh,
yeah.
a great description.
But it set me up for having a really successful setting or flipping the freedom switch?
Title of our webinar, Flipping the Freedom Switch. What in the world? Show me the switch. Show me the
Right.
switch. What do you mean by flipping the freedom switch, Josh?
Okay. So before I tell you how we flip that, I want to tell you where it is. So it's not really some just switch that we can find and flip, but
Darn it.
it's pretty darn close. It's actually a part of our brain. There's a part of our brain called the reticular activating system, and it's about the size of our pinky, and it's kind of at the top of the brainstem and connecting to the brain, and it plays a really important role in our brain. It essentially filters information, because our brain has roughly 1 billion bits of information that are being sent to it every second, give or take 500 million. So it's a ton of information. Every nerve in your body is saying, something's touching me, because you're like, yeah, it's my pants, no big deal, right? But if all of that information was being sent to our brain would just be overloaded. It couldn't handle processing that much information. So this reticular activating system plays a huge part in how we experience the world around us. So what? Let's see. I'm just going to look at my notes real quick and make sure I'm not getting ahead. So the reticular activating system, what I was able to do was able to turn that on to this idea that I could find freedom. And so what essentially happened when I had this metaphorical flipping of the freedom switch is that everything I watched, everything I experienced, if I'd watch a TED Talk or a movie or a YouTube video, or even went to a friend's funeral or a friend's mother's funeral, and she'd had a stroke and had to relearn how to talk. Nova series talking about memory hacking, just like it just felt like I was getting these huge downloads and these explosions of like ways that I could find freedom. It seemed like the whole world around me was teaching me how to find freedom. Now, you might think, oh, that's you might not see how that's actually possible, but Vinny, have you ever bought a car?
Yes.
Okay. And have you ever noticed that once you buy that car and you start driving it, that magically everybody else seems to have bought that same car?
Michelle, my wife, has heard that a lot. We thought we bought a car that was pretty unique, and we hadn't seen it a lot, and we loved it. And it was weird that after we bought that, we realized about everybody in town bought that same car. Why
Right.
didn't we see that before? Is that kind
Yeah.
of where you headed?
Yep, exactly. Another example, so everybody has that. That's a perfect example of your reticular activating system at work. Another example is if you're at a social gathering, and there's a lot of conversations going on. You can be in the middle of a conversation, and way across the room, somebody says, "Vinny," and it's like, boom, your attention can be drawn to that.
Yeah.
And that's your reticular activating system allowing that information through.
Interesting.
So flipping the freedom switch is essentially turning your reticular activating system onto the idea that you can find freedom, so that you can see how the world can teach you to find freedom.
Can I ask you, Josh? There's for many of us here, we've participated in a variety of, again, 12 steps, other online programs before finding our way to Fortify. There's a statement: to the brain, meaning is everything. And I'm just curious, does that tie in here that there's another statement: what I become what I think about most. If I'm worried about what other people think of me or what other people are saying about me, a lot of us have that in our personalities and character. I'm in that noisy room, and if I hear my name, is it that reticular activating system that it has meaning, because that's a very powerful belief. Somebody's talking about me. even though there's a whole bunch of conversation going on, my mind goes to that word. And is it because that has meaning particularly to me because I'm either worried about it, thinking about it? Is that an example of reticular activating system?
Yeah, yeah. And so the way that the settings, so to speak, of the reticular activating system really have an impact on the way that you're able to perceive the world.
So when we hear guys talking about that which I resist becomes difficult to resist, the thing I resist most, oh, somebody out there's got to give me that quote in the comments. But don't think of pink elephants. And of course, what do? Start thinking about pink elephants. When I try to stop something, you're suggesting it's reticular activating system that, okay, we're focusing on this. This is important. Don't think about pink elephants. Boom. That's like all I'm thinking about. Don't think about triggers. I don't know if you get into that, but is this what's happening up there? I'm giving it importance. Yeah. And now all of a sudden I see nothing but blue Ford Tauruses because I just bought one. I'm wondering, I wonder if there's any more out there, and boom, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. And actually something that a lot of people will probably be thinking, hey, well, if I can do, because this is right where my brain, once I flip that switch, this is right where my brain initially went to, was, hey, if I can, because essentially I just learned that I can control that filter. And so I said, if I can control that filter, I wonder if I can set it to not see things so that I'm not triggered. And I had a really cool experience with it. But it was kind of more, I guess, more an elementary thing, or an elementary level tool or technique. That, by the way, if anybody's interested in hearing about that, I'd be happy to, have a conversation. Hit me up on freedomwired.com. There's a comment section, or a contact me section. Throw your name and email in there and shoot me a message, and I'd be happy to kind of share that experience with you. But really,
you to type that in.
Okay.
If you will, your website is freedomwired.com. And we have talked about, when you and I were talking about earlier, and there's actually a big movement in the therapeutic communities. I'll even say not just a movement, but debate going on. Once an addict, always an addict. A lot of people saying that can be a valuable belief. Some people are saying it could be one of the most destructive beliefs for long-term freedom that exists. It's something that initially you found helpful, but then it started to become a burden. Can you share some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I actually had a therapist fairly early on in my recovery, maybe a couple of years in, that told me, Josh, this is going to be something that you're going to struggle with every day for the rest of your life. And that just like hit me like a bombshell, right? It was like, whoa. Now I needed to have that perspective. I needed to have the perspective changed that this was going to be a 4-week problem that I was going to be able to fix. So it was helpful in that way because it set me up for a long-term game. But at some point it became, I think of a good analogy of it is like a ball and chain. It keeps me safe, keeps me close to that place. But at some point I didn't need that safety, and it actually became something that was holding me back, because obviously look at where I'm at now. It's I wouldn't have been here had I never stepped beyond this idea that this idea that I had, once an addict, always an addict. So yeah, that's played a big part in helping me get to where I am today.
On the website, which you've just written about, freedomwire.com, you refer to addiction as the hijacking of the brain's normal processes. Talk about the brain being hijacked. We use that phrase in Fortify as well. it's an important part of understanding the tools that you've learned, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there's two real key players in the brain that deal with addiction. There's this is simplified, but if we just keep it simple, there's these two players. One is we have our prefrontal cortex that is where we make most of our decisions. It's the decision part of our brain. It's where we're designed. Our brains are designed to be most of the time. Because it's thoughtful, it's thinking about the long-term effects of something, of any choice that we make. It's thinking about all the possible outcomes. So there's a lot of information that it's processing. And then on the flip side, we have what is called the reticular activating system, which is, kind of lower in the brain, up above the brainstem, kind of connected to the brainstem. And its function is to, when we have some type of intense experience, is to take over so that when a lion or a bear comes running into our camp, excuse me, when a lion or bear comes running into our camp, that we're not thinking, okay, if I run and jump over this log, I might rip my pants or I might scratch my knee. We can't afford to take the time to think about all of the possible outcomes. We just need to run at all costs. It doesn't matter if we scratch our knee. It doesn't matter if we need to get away. And so it's that fight or flight part of the brain. Now, the problem with this, there's a susceptibility to addiction with having the limbic system having the ability to take over processing in decision making, because the limbic system isn't great at determining where we're at on the scale of death. And so I don't know how much you can see. So death to feeling uncomfortable. There's a scale or a spectrum, and the limbic system isn't great. I mean, it's designed to keep us from dying, right? Way over here. Sorry, it's backwards on the screen. So death is what it's trying to keep us from avoiding. But all the way down to feeling uncomfortable, there's that scale, and it's not great at recognizing how far over should I really be before I kick in and take over the decision making process. Which is why when I was in recovery and finding or working recovery, and I'd have a relapse, I'd have to go to my wife and say, hey babe, I messed up, I had a relapse. And she would often say to me, like, what were you thinking? Didn't you realize this was going to hurt me? And it's like, yeah, it's like I wasn't. I don't know. It's just like I wasn't. And that's partially true. I mean, I was thinking, but I wasn't thinking with the part of the brain that says, hey, this isn't a bad, or this isn't a good choice. So the limbic system is susceptible to being hijacked by addictive substances and experiences, because what they do is they create intense experiences, intense emotions. Every addictive substance is intense in some way, shape, or form, whether it's intensely satiative or exciting, or allows you to create, or fantasy, or those things are really intense, which is why they cause the limbic system to default to making the choice that we don't really want to make.
Josh, I had someone, if I can deviate 1 second, this is really interesting to me, and I think to our members, we often confuse wants and needs. And again, when you talk about being hijacked, have I caused the limbic system to respond in sort of, again, an emergency red flag mode to things in my life that before I became addicted to, say, pornography or any other unwanted sexual behavior, or drugs or alcohol for that matter, I change. So bored. When I'm bored, my limbic system is saying, we got to run for medication. In other words, I think the intensity of certain experiences in our life, bored. We talk about the blasted emotions: bored, lonely, angry, depressed, despondent, tired. When those things happen, I have I'm talking about me, I had an overreaction to any of those stimuli. And I wondered, because I don't use my prefrontal cortex responsibly. I jump right into limbic that says, run like heck and get medicated. You're in a bad situation. Do you think we rewire the limbic to react to things that just years earlier may not have been that big of a deal, and I would have responded, how about responsibly? Or I'm not sure what normal is, but I would have reacted in a less addictive, compulsive, intensive way. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I do. And the process that I'm going to be sharing with you, or sharing with everybody today, it's worked on more than just addiction to pornography, because our brain is that same process is happening all the time, whether it's being chased by a bear, or whether it's feeling stress about a test, or it's that same process is always happening in life.
Once you become aware of what's triggering to you, to us, it's understandable that we're sort of taught to run. When that trigger comes along, run like crazy. But after working hard on that, you started to find that there were limitations in trying to do that. And can you share a little bit more about that transition from sort of running away in panic mode? I'll never
Mm-hmm.
forget your motion of white knuckling sobriety. That sounds like white knuckling sobriety is running like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So to answer your question, I think it's important that we understand. We tend to think of triggers as all bad, right? But triggers, by definition, can be neutral, and they usually are, because there's usually a series of triggers that happen. For example, a really good example, probably the most simple example of a trigger, is the trigger on a gun, right? The trigger on a gun can't hurt you. It just can't. Nor can the spring that the trigger causes to spring, which is also a trigger that triggers the firing pin, which then triggers the explosion in the casing of the bullet. Now the explosion, so there was multiple, excuse me, there's multiple triggers that happen in this chain reaction of triggers before it starts to get dangerous. Now the explosion,
Me too. I'm in a
excuse me,
conference call, John.
maybe get some water.
Take a 30-second water break.
So there's multiple triggers that happen before it starts to get dangerous, and then you get to this where there's an explosion in the casing of the bullet, and that could be dangerous, in it as if whether or not the bullet's there, because it's an explosion. But the real danger comes when the bullet comes flying out of the barrel of the gun at hundreds of miles an hour. That's when it's really dangerous. Um, so so really understanding triggers was a big part of this process, and it's something you have to really understand before you can really apply. Oh my goodness! Before you can really apply this process that I'm going to share with you, because what I was able to do. So to kind of answer your question, feeling triggered can be a good thing, because what it allows us to do is kind of take almost a more offensive approach to to fighting this battle. Now, when we're experiencing a trigger, if we understand that it's kind of like a web. So you have something, you tap on a web, and it ripples. The effects of tapping on that web ripple outward. Each thing triggering something else. So if we understand can get to the very top of that, to the very point of impact, we can experience a trigger, and what we're essentially doing is we're sending a ripple through our brain that's essentially highlighting all of the things that cause our limbic system to take over. So all of that intense emotion to take over. Now, the really interesting thing about this concept is that so I'll do presentations all the time, and I typically tell this, or I ask every group this question. So who in here is afraid of spiders? And in a group of like 10 people, like 9 of them are going to raise their hand, right? And then I'll ask them, okay, so I'll pick one of the people. Okay, you're afraid of spiders. Good to know. I'll ask the people why they're afraid of spiders. And I've never had somebody say, I'm afraid of spiders because because some of them are poisonous, and I don't know the difference between a poisonous spider and a non-poisonous spider. What I usually get, like 85% of the time, is like they're just creepy, and they have too many legs, and their eyes, and they have a web, and they can jump. Like it's very they're having a physical response to that question. Even hearing the word spiders is bringing stuff up, and they can't really put it into memory. Like that, it doesn't bring up a complete memory that says, oh, this is why I'm afraid of spiders. Every once in a while I'll have somebody share an experience like, oh, I was grabbing a Dorito out of the chip bag, and there was a spider on the chip, and it terrified me. Or there was a spider crawling on my face one day. Like that's not usually what I hear. What I usually hear is, ugh, I get this, I see, ugh, they're just creepy, right? And what's happening is they've got a lot of little tidbits of memories, and memories, there's a lot of different things that can be stored in a memory. There's like colors, and there's smells, and there's feelings, and um, there's just a lot that goes into a memory. Um, and essentially what we're doing when we have that trigger, when I mention spiders, I'm ringing the bell, so to speak, on all of those things that are coming up. So once I flipped this freedom switch, I started seeing things everywhere. And one of the things that I saw was actually a documentary. It's called Memory Hackers on Nova. It's a Nova series. I believe it's year 15 or 14. It's the first episode. Really, really interesting. And it's talking about how memories can be hijacked. So in this, there's a study that was done in Sweden, I believe, where they had people that were terrified of spiders come into a room, and what they're describing in the video is that by showing somebody a spider, you're actually bringing up all of these tidbits of memories and experiences. You're pulling them to the front of your mind, and essentially making them susceptible to change. So through seeing that,
So as opposed to
and
running, they're facing the spider.
yes, much like the limbic system can be manipulated, or it can be manipulated by intense experiences, we can manipulate the normal process of our brain to essentially experience a trigger and pull up all of that stuff, all of that garbage,
Okay.
and then this was another part of the freedom switch being flipped. Was I said, okay, well, I know now that I can pull all of that stuff up. That's what's happening naturally. That's what causes the physical response from people when you mention spiders, and ask them why they're afraid of spiders. We're essentially pulling all of that up. So at that point, it was just like, oh, well, if I can pull it all up, I wonder if I could stop it from getting back into long-term storage. Like, could I disconnect that? Could I sever all of that garbage from this trigger? So seeing a trigger can be a very good thing. Now it's important with this process, as I kind of walk you through, and I'm just going to tell you about a really impactful experience that I had doing this, following this process. it's important that we find a trigger that's truly neutral. We don't want to, in this case, we don't want to look at a pornographic image and say, oh, that's triggering, and try this process on that. You're exposing yourself to that. It's going to be counterproductive.
Okay.
So what we want to do is we want to recognize triggers that would be neutral to somebody else. So I've worked with people that have had substance abuse problems, and for them, seeing a street sign is triggering, because that might have been a street sign that they used to turn down to go buy drugs.
Yeah.
But for me, it's just a street sign, right? And on the flip side, I've seen blurry images that that led me to seeing the pornography behind those blurry images. And
sure.
So blurry images to me were similar to seeing a street sign to somebody else that had, a drug addiction or a substance abuse addiction. But not all blurry images are bad, right? So I had this experience where I was working late one night and needed to find some information about a business. So I drilled down in Street View of Google Maps, the Street View, and what I saw was that they blur out the numbers on the buildings, and they do that on license plates and faces and stuff to protect privacy, right? But they'd blurred out the numbers on this building, and because I'd gotten really good at recognizing my triggers, I noticed that seeing that blurry image was one of those very top level triggers, like the trigger on a gun, and it started to bring up some of those feelings and intense tidbits of information that were causing me to feel triggered. So what I did was I actually visualized, or I first of all was paying attention to what I was experiencing. For me, it was I started to get a slight increase in my heart rate. I got a little bit of a tunnel vision thing going on, and kind of almost got to the steps of it's like the steps of perspiration, right before I was about to start perspiring. But there were just these little cues that said, hey, you're feeling triggered right now. So what I did, and this is going to sound crazy to you guys, so but hear me out, because the results were absolutely mind-blowing. And this is what my reticular activating system told me would help me find freedom. So I just trusted it and was like, all right, I'm going to give this a shot. It sounds crazy, but if crazy works, then crazy works, right? So what I did was I closed my eyes and I tried to visualize in my mind, because physically in our brains, when we experience something, there's a really complex web of synapses that and neurons that create this experience. If I'm starting to have an increase in heart rate, it's because something is happening inside my brain that's telling me, it's bringing up this stuff that's telling my body to respond that way. So what I did was I visualized, just super simplified. This is kind of sounding, it's going to kind of sound like a dream. They don't have to make sense, right? In a dream, you can be waiting in line to talk on the school bus, or waiting in the line to get on the school bus, and then you're instantly in your bedroom, eating a bag of Doritos with oranges in them, like orange Doritos. I don't know. It doesn't have to make sense, right? It's just it's nonsense. But
I know
what we're essentially doing.
Help you with that, Josh. Just
Awesome. Thank you, Vinny.
Yeah.
But what we're essentially doing is we're speaking to the subconscious, right? And the subconscious doesn't think the same way that our conscious mind thinks. It thinks very abstract. So what I was trying to do is convey to my subconscious that I wanted to, and I envisioned seeing a blurry image as like a spot in my head. So I closed my eyes and envisioned where this spot was of seeing a blurry image, where it resided in my brain. And then I imagined all of the tidbits of intense experiences that and tidbits of memories were located, and how, and more importantly, where they were located, how they were attached um, to this experience of seeing a blurry image. And so then in my mind's eye, I pulled it out in front of me so I could see it. It's like, here's the spot, and then here's the web of things that are of connections that are tying it to all these other things, all these other tidbits of experiences and information. And the thing with visualization, because this really is a visualization technique, is that the more intense the visualization is, the more real you make it, the more powerful it is. Which is why the reticular activating system picks up on you buying a car so quickly. It's because you start riding in the car. You've paid a lot of money for the car. Like you're making a very tangible, as tangible as or it's a very tangible experience. Now, what you're trying to do with this process is you're trying to create as tangible of an experience as possible. So what I did is I had my eyes closed and I envisioned this dot and all of these webs. Now, again, we've talked about the not all of the connections, or not everything that connects to a trigger is bad. Maybe we didn't talk about that, but maybe I have a blurry image of because our camera was broken. We went on this crazy cool experience, and we've got a blurry image of a whitewater rafting with the family. But we keep it because even though it's blurry, it's what we have to remind us of that.
Hmm.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my brain and say, okay, I'm going to focus on all of those things that are causing me to have the response that I'm having right now, the increased heart rate, the tunnel vision, those things. And in my mind, I saw those webs of information. I saw the ones that were leading to negativity and things the unhealthy stuff. I saw those as red, and then I saw the healthy ones as green. And so I just dismissed the healthy ones. Just, I don't need to deal with those, and really focused on what these connections looked like, and visualize them as thoroughly as possible. So they were red. How many of them were there? Were they alive? Were they dead? Were they squishy? Were they heavy? Were they, wet? Like, what did they feel like? I got really thorough in that. And then I started visualizing, okay, so once I had found them all, and I was asking myself questions like, okay, is that all of them? And in my mind's eye, no, there was a few more. So I maybe needed to use a flashlight so that I could see all the connections. But then I visualized cutting those connections. And this,
Like with a pair of scissors?
like with a pair of scissors. And I like to have fun with it. And what you want to do is create this real experience as realistic as possible. So when you cut it, you want to hear the chink, you want to hear that. And you want to see what happens to the connection when it's cut. Now this experience, like mine, I think about it very literally. Like, okay, this is in my brain. This is what's actually happening. But I've done this with hundreds of people, and I get crazy experiences. Like, some involve like blue fluffy sweaters. Some involve like Starship Enterprise, like the con. Like it doesn't really matter. All we're trying to do is convey to our brain that we want these connections that cause this physical and emotional response to be severed somehow. So in this very powerful process, this blurry image process that I'm describing to you, I went and I was using a laser. So I was like, and I was making the sounds and having fun with it, right? And to all of you that think I'm crazy, I just say, don't knock it till you try it. But the laser was working, and then I actually changed it and modified it and said, okay, well, it's not working fast enough. So in my mind, somehow all those connections just lined up for me. And so I was able to start cutting them, right? But they started to like reform, and so I had to adapt, and I got an upgraded laser that would and then get rid of the ends and kind of make these solid stones at the end, so that the connection couldn't be reformed, right? And this is just my experience, but I made this cutting experience as intense as possible and as realistic as possible. I envisioned what it smelled like when the laser hit those connections, and the smoke rising up from them. Just tried to create a really, really intense experience. And the beautiful thing about this crazy experience is that once I had severed all the connections, I re-examined this point that was in my brain of seeing a blurry image, and I could see that I visualized and made sure that there was nothing else connecting it to there were none of those connections left. And then I opened my eyes, and when I walk people through this, I have them open their eyes, take a deep breath, and then look at the trigger. Or in my case, I was looking at this blurry image that caused me to feel triggered in the first place. I looked at it, and at that point, this miraculous thing happened that just absolutely blew my mind. It was no longer triggering. At that point, it was just a blurry image. So I got to experience that blurry image just like, my mom that's never struggled with pornography would experience that blurry image. So it was really profound. And when I walk people through this, I always have them check. And sometimes they're not very thorough with, cutting, maybe there's some things that they missed. So I have them check in, okay, like on a scale of 1 to 10, like how triggered is seeing that blurry image to you, or how triggering is that to you? And if it's not a 0, then we go back in and we find some more connections, and we use some more tools, and we dismantle those. And the end result.
I love that word, dismantle.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can, just put you on hold. As we approach, we're running out of time quickly. I don't know where the hour goes. When we do these things, it just amazes me that we start and all of a sudden we're done, and you're just at the tip of this iceberg. So, but dismantling, that's important. I also thought of another word, demystify. The blurry image has such power for you. Again, this is, the blurry picture may mean nothing, as you said earlier, to somebody else, but it has power and meaning and even control in your life. You haven't just run from it. There's the blurry image. No, you're taking out your lightsaber, metaphorically, and maybe I'm saying it wrong. You're sort of saying, come on, I know who you are. You are dismantling and taking away its power and control, which, and to me, the good thing is that rather than run from it, you faced it and dismantled it. And which, that's the freedom. White knuckling sobriety, I'm hanging on for dear life. And I just get the feeling there's a lot of running away when white knuckling. But you crossed this bridge through a practice of awareness, mindfulness, and I'll call it brain surgery and brain rewiring. I can't wait on the replay to hear you. Really, it worked for you. That's what I'm hearing. You don't have to do it exactly the way you did it. Maybe a guy wants to take a chainsaw, as he's visualizing this. It's not quite so delicate with a chainsaw, so be careful. But it is, science has shown the power of this kind of mindfulness and awareness does work and has the capability to incapacitate what used to be something that left me telling my wife, I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't even know I was thinking, to this stepping up and taking control rather than being controlled. Forgive me for interrupting you, but when you said dismantle, I thought that's exactly right. I'm not on the defensive anymore. I'm calling the plays. I'm taking charge and beginning to demystify, dismantle, even destroy things that used to have my limbic system going, look out, run like crazy. And we get tired. I'm tired of running. Is
Hmm.
there a tool I can sorry. I
Yeah,
really,
no, and you're exactly right. And that's where the beauty of this process for me. Now, this process was designed for me because that's what my reticular activating system just honed in on, right? Now, it turns out that this process is really helpful for other people. I've done this with lots of other groups, and whenever I've had a chance to really go through this very, thoroughly and help them through this process, they've had amazing results. Um, and so it's really, really powerful. But the beauty of this process is that you're still in a safe place because we're not looking at triggers. We're always staying at that high level. We don't just run into, if we're going to take the offensive, we don't just run into the battlefield and, oh, I'm going to go remove all the, I'm going to go cut down all the billboard signs on the way to work so that I don't have to see that. We're taking an offensive in a place that's safe so that we can um, do it safely. And that's, I think, this is the real beauty behind this process.
just you saying it can be done, and I know this is a new technique. It's new in many ways for me. It's new for the people that are listening and going to be listening on the replay. But I'm also getting this element of hope. I don't need to be scared as I was about spiders because I didn't run from the spider. If I keep running for spiders, I'm always going to be afraid of spiders. But I brought the spider, again, more metaphorically, into my mind and said, that's a real powerful trigger for me. I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. But by doing some visualization techniques, which I know you're just scratching the surface, I can disarm that fear. I can disarm that trigger. Don't run from the trigger. Be aware of the trigger. Put that trigger under a microscope in our brains and get the tools out and dissect it until it's destroyed. At least those are just
Mhm.
quick words. We're at the top of the hour, Josh. Where do we go from here? This is great stuff. This is great stuff.
Yeah, so if I had some recommendations for anybody listening, I would say that one of the biggest things that you can do is set your filter to finding freedom. Now, I didn't really go into a whole lot of details about how you do that, but a really quick, easy um, tip that you can follow is to go stand in front of the mirror every day and say things like, I find freedom every single day. Everywhere I go, freedom comes to me. um, and say the more you can say it, like if you say it like, I find freedom every day, like it's going to be less impactful. But if you say it like you believe it, like, oh my gosh, I find freedom everywhere I go, every single day, every show I watch, every conversation I have, it's telling your limbic system, or your uh, reticular activating system, very intensely, that this is important, and it'll key in on things. This idea that you can flip the freedom switch can create a custom plan for you. It'll If you do it, it will help you when you're working recovery. The things that you're learning in Fortify, you're going to learn better and more profoundly. You're going to learn the different aspects and how they apply to you more specifically this video than as opposed to some other video. So it's going to really increase your rate at which you're able to work through things. So it's not a cure-all, but it's a really, really good force multiplier.
Well, and you are hitting on so many of the other key components of recovery that involve awareness, mindfulness, we've talked about, um, demystifying fear and practice, standing in the mirror. All of this stuff you're describing are all great components. I've just never heard them quite put into this specific of an idea. Do you have room in your? What's your Wednesday night group? You got room for some more? I'm hoping some people are going to sign up. I want to be
Yeah, I
in
do.
the Wednesday night group, Josh.
Okay, yeah, sign up, Vinny.
Will you? You cover? Do you cover some of this with some of your students? I know you've got a faith-based group
Mhm.
earlier on Wednesday night, but I hope you're sharing some of this stuff with other group members. I'm eager to learn more. We've done this with other visitors to webinars, but we may need to do a part 2 on this later this year, early next year. If they want more information on how to do it, how do they acquire that information?
Yeah, so go to freedomwired.com.
Okay.
There's a contact me section on the site. Give me your name and email and shoot me a quick message. I'd be happy to schedule a webinar, if you've got a specific group of people, or even have a conversation one-on-one with people, because this is something that was shown to me, or was given to me, and I am passionate about sharing it because I want other people to be able to live the way that I live now. So hit me up on the website.
The word fascinating was one we used at the beginning of the webinar today. This is fascinating, and Fortify J just said groundbreaking. I think it is. This is terrific. In fact, anonymous user, I don't know if he's joking, but he said, I just tried it. I don't feel triggered anymore.
Awesome.
There's a switch. Thank you so much, Josh. I want to go another hour or two with you. We'll find a way to do that later. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. By way of announcement, next week, Holly and I will be on the Fortify chat. And May 29th, we'll call the redo. We do a do-over. We had a couple of technical issues back in February with Raisha, who will be our webinar guest May 29th. Fortify chat will actually be the week prior to that on May 22nd. Me and Holly will be there for May for Fortify chat. And just by the way, thank you. We had quite a few emails. Some of you know that Raisha's brother was one of the victims in the Christchurch, New Zealand mosque massacre. And we love her, and our thoughts and prayers, condolences have gone out to her. And but she's a fighter, and she's working through her own grief right now, but will be returning to us at the end of May. We send our love to Raisha, anxious to be with you at the end of the month. Josh, thanks again, and thanks all of you that have posted comments that were here today. We hope this is, again, part of our promise to help those on Fortify find lasting freedom. Josh, you have, and good on you, brother.
Thank you, Vinny.
We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Good to be with you. Take care. Bye-bye.